They towed my truck, so I shut down their entire neighborhood. That is the short version. The kind you say at a bar and people laugh because it sounds exaggerated. But I promise you, every word of this happened, and it started on a Tuesday night when I pulled into my driveway after a double shift and found nothing there but an oil stain and a bright orange sticker flapping on my mailbox like it had something to prove. I had just worked 16 hours at the paper mill outside of Brook Hollow. The kind of shift where your ears ring even after you take the plugs out, your hands smell like metal and steam, and your back feels like somebody's been tightening bolts along your spine all day. I remember turning onto Cedar Ridge Road, my headlights sweeping across the same cracked pavement I've driven on for 15 years, thinking about nothing more complicated than a hot shower and maybe a leftover meatloaf sandwich. Then I saw it. My driveway was empty. Now, when you've driven the same old truck for nearly 2 decades, you know the shape of it the way you know your own shadow. My 2004 Ford F-150 isn't pretty. The paint's faded to a dull blue-gray. The passenger door has a dent from when my brother misjudged a fence post back in 2011, and the bed scratched from hauling lumber, scrap, and just about everything else that ever needed moving. But it's mine. It was my dad's before that. It has history in its dents. And it was gone. At first I thought maybe I'd parked on the street and forgotten. Exhaustion will play tricks on you. I walked the curb, checked both sides of the road, even looked across at old Mrs. Delaney's place like somehow it might have rolled uphill out of embarrassment. Nothing. That's when I saw the sticker. Vehicle exceeds neighborhood height limitations. Subject to immediate removal. I remember reading that twice, maybe 3 times, because it didn't make sense. Height limitations. On my own property. Now here's the part you need to understand. I bought my house in 2009, long before the development next door existed. Back then it was just an open field, tall grass, and one old oak tree where deer used to bed down. 5 years later a company came in, cleared it out, and built what they called Silver Meadow Estates. 62 houses, all 2-story, all painted some variation of agreeable gray. 3-car garages. Trimmed hedges so sharp they looked fake. A stone entrance with a fountain that ran even in drought season. And an HOA, Homeowners Association. I'd heard horror stories, but it didn't concern me. I wasn't in their subdivision. My property line ran along the back edge of their walking path. Close, but separate. Apparently, that wasn't separate enough. I called the number on the sticker. Some towing company out of Millbrook. The guy on the line sounded bored. Yeah, we picked up a blue Ford from Cedar Ridge. HOA authorization. You can get it tomorrow. $425 cash or card. $425. For a truck parked in my own driveway. I asked him who signed off on it. He gave me a name I recognized from the newsletter that occasionally got wedged into my mailbox by mistake. Patricia Langford, president of Silver Meadow Estates. I stood there in the dark, phone pressed to my ear, staring at that oil stain like it might answer for her. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not just anger, but insult. The kind that crawls up your neck slow and steady. The next morning, instead of sleeping like I should have, I drove my neighbor Hank's old sedan into Silver Meadow. You can always tell when you don't belong in a place like that. The streets are too clean. The mailboxes match. The houses don't just look similar, they look coordinated, like they're trying not to offend anyone. The clubhouse sat near the entrance, a little brick building with white columns, like a bank pretending to be a home. I walked in and found half a dozen people sitting around a polished table with coffee cups and what looked like a tray of pastries. Patricia Langford was exactly what you'd expect. Early 50s, athletic build, tennis skirt, even though I've never once seen her hold a racket. Perfect hair, perfect posture, the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked, like I was a delivery driver who'd wandered in by mistake. "You had my truck towed," I said, "from my driveway." She didn't look surprised. She glanced down at a folder in front of her like she'd been waiting for this. "Yes," she said calmly. "Your vehicle exceeds the visual height guidelines outlined in our community standards." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "I don't live in your community." She folded her hands. There was a small pause, just enough to feel deliberate. Actually, when the subdivision expanded in 2018, the boundary adjustment included your parcel under aesthetic oversight. It's in the amended filing with the county. Aesthetic oversight, I said. "So you're telling me you can tow my truck off my land because you don't like how it looks from your walking trail?" She tilted her head slightly. It's about maintaining property values. There it was. Not safety, not law. Property values. One of the men at the table chimed in, "You were notified by mail." I told him the only mail I get from them is junk addressed to current resident, and it usually ends up in my trash. Patricia leaned forward. "Mr. Keller, is it? We're simply asking that you comply. Park the truck in your garage or replace it with a vehicle that meets guidelines. Once the fee is settled, this can all move forward amicably. Comply. Replace it." Like it was that simple. I remember looking around that table at their pressed shirts and manicured nails and thinking about my dad teaching me to change brake pads in that same driveway when I was 16. About hauling lumber to fix my roof after a storm. About overtime shifts and scraped knuckles and everything that truck represented. "You had no right," I said quietly. Patricia's smile tightened. "The board believes we did. They thought I'd pay the fee, grumble to myself, and figure out a way to hide my truck behind a fence like it was something shameful. They didn't know something. Something that had been sitting in my backyard for 20 years, long before Silver Meadow Estates had a fountain or a board or a president with a tennis skirt. And that's when I started thinking differently about the situation. Now here's the part they never bothered to ask about, because people like that don't usually ask questions outside their bubble. Behind my house, past the sagging wooden fence and the patch of ground where my dog used to dig, there's a back acre that slopes gently toward a line of pine trees. It's nothing special to look at. Wild grass in the summer, mud in the spring, hard as brick in August. But 20 years ago, before my dad passed, a telecom company came knocking. They wanted to put a small cell relay tower back there. Nothing huge, nothing blinking red like in the movies. Just a compact steel structure about the size of a utility pole with a control box at the base and underground lines feeding into the main grid. My dad had been skeptical. I'd been younger, more optimistic. The rep explained it would strengthen coverage for the region, future-proof the area, support growth. They offered a steady monthly lease. Enough to cover property taxes, and then some. Minimal maintenance. Access road stays clear. That was it. We signed. Over the years, that little tower blended into the background of my life. I mowed around it. I kept the access gravel clear. Once in a while a tech truck would roll in, do a routine check, and leave. The lease renewed quietly every 5 years. Direct deposit hit my account like clockwork. When Silver Meadow was built, I didn't think twice about it. If anything, I figured they benefited from it. Strong signal. Good service. Smart homes running smooth. What I didn't realize until much later was just how much they depended on it. After that meeting at the clubhouse, I went straight home, drove past my empty driveway, and walked into my backyard. I stood there a long time looking at that control box. Now, before anyone gets dramatic, let me be clear. I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't cut wires or damage equipment. The lease contract gave me rights as the property owner to suspend access in the event of a dispute or safety concern. It was written in plain English. I'd skimmed it once years ago and remembered that clause vaguely. That night, I pulled the file out of my desk drawer and read it carefully. Suspend access pending resolution of material interference with property use. Material interference. Like towing my vehicle off my land. The next morning, before sunrise, I walked out there with a cup of coffee in one hand and the key to the control panel in the other. The air was cool, that early morning quiet where even the birds haven't decided to start up yet. I unlocked the panel and stared at the breaker. It was almost underwhelming. Just a standard industrial switch. Nothing cinematic about it. I remember thinking, this is either petty or it's proportional. Then I flipped it off. There wasn't a dramatic sound. No sparks. Just silence. A hum fading away. I went inside, made myself breakfast, and waited. By noon, I heard the first siren of frustration. Not an ambulance. Not police. Just car alarms chirping and then cutting off abruptly. Around 1 o'clock, Hank texted me. "You seeing this mess over at Silver Meadow?" I walked down toward the back fence where I could see the edge of their street. The main entrance gate, the fancy wrought iron one with the keypad and camera, was stuck halfway open. A line of cars backed up behind it. People getting out, waving arms, pressing remotes over and over like that might help. Garage doors weren't responding either. I could see one guy sitting in his Lexus, pressing his opener again and again while the door stayed stubbornly closed. Eventually he got out and tried to lift it manually, but those things aren't built for that. Around mid-afternoon, a white van with a security company logo pulled in. 2 technicians fiddled with panels, checked wiring, scratched their heads. They probably assumed it was a local power issue, except the houses themselves still had electricity. Lights were on, TVs glowing. But their connected systems, the stuff that relied on consistent signal routing through that relay, had gone dark. That evening, I made popcorn and sat on my back steps like it was a show. By day 2, it wasn't funny anymore. It was chaos. The neighborhood Facebook group, which I had access to thanks to a friend who screenshotted posts for me, had exploded. People complaining about security cameras offline, smart doorbells not recording packages, alarm systems failing to sync. One woman wrote a long post about how she couldn't access her garage and had to leave her car on the street overnight, which apparently was a bigger tragedy than anything I'd ever experienced. There was a comment thread blaming the telecom provider, another blaming solar flares. One guy confidently declared it was a cyber attack. I said nothing. Late that afternoon, a black SUV pulled into my driveway. Patricia stepped out, this time not in tennis whites, but in a navy blazer. 2 other board members followed. Their expressions had shifted from smug to strained. She knocked 3 times. Firm. Controlled. I opened the door and leaned against the frame. Mr. Keller, she began, we're experiencing a significant infrastructure failure affecting our community. I nodded slowly. That sounds inconvenient. She inhaled through her nose, like she was recalibrating her tone. Our provider indicates the relay station on your property is offline. That's correct, I said. You shut it down? I took a sip of coffee. I suspended access pending resolution of material interference with my property use. One of the men behind her frowned. What does that even mean? It means, I said, that when my truck was removed from my driveway without my consent, that constituted interference. Patricia's composure cracked just slightly. This is retaliation. No, I said calmly. This is leverage. There was a long pause. You could hear kids playing somewhere down the block, unaware that their parents' carefully curated lives were glitching. We can resolve the towing fee, she said finally. Reimburse you. Reimburse me, I repeated. You authorized it. You don't reimburse theft. You correct it. Her jaw tightened. What do you want? That question had been sitting in my chest for 2 days. I want written confirmation that my property is exempt from your aesthetic guidelines. Permanently. I want reimbursement for the towing fee, lost wages for the hours I spent dealing with this, and a formal apology from the board. The man behind her scoffed. This is absurd. What's absurd, I said, is thinking you can dictate what sits in my driveway. Patricia held up a hand to silence him. And the tower? New lease terms, I said. Triple the current rate. 5 years prepaid. All 3 of them stared at me like I'd just asked for their firstborn. That's extortion, Patricia said quietly. No, I said. It's negotiation. They left without agreeing. I kept the breaker off. By day 4, I heard that their maintenance budget was bleeding out. Emergency service calls aren't cheap. Temporary signal boosters were being installed house by house at ridiculous cost. Elderly residents complained about medical alert systems lagging. Parents had to manually open garage doors every morning, which, if you ask me, is hardly the apocalypse, but apparently it felt like one to them. Hank came over with a 6-pack on day 6. You really did it, he said, shaking his head, half impressed, half nervous. I didn't answer right away. I was starting to feel the weight of it. Not guilt exactly, but gravity. Power, even the small kind, changes how you sleep. On day 10, the county got involved. Some inspector drove out to verify the relay status. I showed him the clause in my contract. He read it twice, shrugged, and said it appeared to be within my rights pending dispute resolution. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, thinking about my dad. He wasn't a confrontational man, but he believed in boundaries. You let someone move your fence once, he used to say, they'll move it again next year. By day 14, Silver Meadow wasn't silver anymore. It was frayed, tempers short. The fountain at the entrance had been shut off to conserve funds. Funny how quickly luxury becomes fragile. And then, just after dinner, headlights swept across my front window. They were back. When I stepped onto the porch that night, it wasn't just Patricia this time. The whole board was there, plus a man in a gray suit I hadn't seen before, probably their attorney. Nobody was smiling. Nobody was pretending this was about property values anymore. The air felt different. Heavy, like a storm that already decided where it was going to land. Patricia spoke first, and her voice had lost that polished edge. Mr. Keller, we'd like to resolve this tonight. I leaned against the railing, arms folded. I'm listening. The man in the gray suit stepped forward. We've reviewed the expansion filing from 2018. There were procedural ambiguities. It appears your parcel was included in oversight language without direct consent. Without direct consent. That's one way to say it. He continued, the board is prepared to formally exempt your property from all HOA standards effective immediately. In writing, filed with the county. Patricia handed me a folder. I didn't open it yet. And the towing fee, she added, will be reimbursed in full, along with documented lost wages. Documented, I repeated, raising an eyebrow. She held my gaze. Within reason. There was a small pause. A quiet acknowledgement that the balance had shifted. And the tower? I asked. The attorney inhaled slowly. The board is prepared to enter into a revised lease agreement at the rate you proposed. 5 years prepaid. Funds transferred upon signature. No one scoffed this time. I let the silence stretch just long enough to remind them what 14 days without convenience felt like. Then I opened the folder. The exemption letter was there, typed clean, stamped, already notarized. It stated in clear language that my property would remain independent of Silver Meadow governance in perpetuity. No aesthetic review. No vehicle restrictions. No fines. In perpetuity. Funny how permanent things become when enough money is at stake. I flipped to the lease addendum. Triple rate. Prepaid term. Clause reaffirming my right to suspend access in the event of future interference. They hadn't just agreed. They'd learned. You understand, Patricia said quietly. This has caused significant disruption. I looked at her. So did towing my truck. For the first time since I'd met her, she didn't argue. She didn't correct my phrasing. She didn't mention property values. She simply nodded once. We shouldn't have handled it that way. There it was. Not a dramatic apology. Not a tearful admission. But something real enough. I signed. The attorney signed. Patricia signed last. The wire transfer hit my account the next morning. And around noon, I walked back out to the control box with that same cup of coffee. Same quiet air. Same breaker switch. I stood there for a second longer than before, not because I doubted myself, but because I understood something now that I hadn't fully grasped 2 weeks earlier. Power isn't loud. It doesn't shout. It hums quietly in the background until someone mistakes it for theirs. I flipped the breaker back on. The hum returned. Within minutes, garage doors all across Silver Meadow started rising in unison. Cameras blinked back to life. The wrought iron gate at the entrance glided open like nothing had happened. The fountain kicked on by evening, water sparkling under carefully placed lights. Order restored. A few days later, my truck came home from the impound lot, engine grumbling like it had opinions about the whole ordeal. I backed it into my driveway slowly, deliberately, letting it sit exactly where it had always sat. Oil stain beneath it. Dent in the passenger door catching the afternoon sun. Nobody said a word. Weeks passed. I'd see Patricia sometimes at the grocery store. She'd give a polite nod. Not warm, not hostile, just aware. Like we both understood something that didn't need repeating. The funny thing is, I don't hate them. That might surprise people. I don't hate Silver Meadow. I don't hate their matching mailboxes or their spotless SUVs. What bothered me wasn't the neat lawns or the HOA meetings. It was the assumption. The quiet belief that because their houses were newer and their lives more automated, they had the authority to redefine mine. And I'll admit something else. Those 2 weeks changed me too. At first, it felt like revenge. A satisfying little correction. But somewhere around day 8 or 9, when I heard about elderly residents struggling with medical alerts and parents walking kids to school because their cars were trapped, it stopped being funny. It became responsibility. See, it's easy to justify pushing back when you've been wronged. It's harder to measure how far is far enough. I could have dragged it out longer. I could have demanded more. The leverage was there. But at some point, you're no longer defending your boundary. You're testing how much control you enjoy holding. And that's a line I didn't want to cross. My dad used to say, you don't swing twice if one punch made the point. The point had been made. Silver Meadow hasn't tried to enforce a single rule on me since. My truck still sits in the driveway. Sometimes it's muddy. Sometimes it's loaded with lumber. Sometimes it's just parked there, quiet and unapologetic. And every now and then, when I hear the synchronized hum of garage doors opening down the street, I remember how fragile systems really are. How the things we depend on most are often built on land we don't think about, owned by people we don't bother to understand. Here's the part that still gets debated when I tell this story. Some folks say I went too far, that shutting down an entire neighborhood over a towing dispute was extreme. Others say I did exactly what needed to be done, that the HOA would have kept tightening the screws until I gave in. Maybe both are true. All I know is this: boundaries matter. Respect matters. And if you let someone rewrite your rights without pushback, don't be surprised when they assume they can rewrite more. So I'll leave it to you. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Paid the fee and kept the peace? Taken them to court? Or flipped the breaker like I did and forced the conversation? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more of them than you'd think. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA that forgot where its authority ends, share your story too. I have a feeling there are more Cedar Ridge moments out there than people realize. Hit like if you believe in standing your ground. Subscribe if you want more stories about everyday people pushing back when lines get crossed. Because sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's just the quiet click of a switch.